Okay, and we are back online and in person for this morning's session about type education. Some housekeeping notes before we start. The roundtable roundtable on type education that was initially scheduled at 12:30. I'm saying this like it's a train announcement. Unfortunately, didn't come together. That's the bad news. The good news is that here in this room at 12:30, we'll have a FontLab demo. So hang tight, you're in for a treat. Our next speaker is Lisa J. Maione. She made it all the way here from Kansas to tell us about her latest developments in education with her own students. She took the opportunity of a fall 2022 workshop to work about new ways to discover and create forms for typographic design and type design, and I hope she'll tell us everything about it. Thank you.
Hello. Good morning. How are you? Fantastic. Yeah, thank you all for being here. It's a real treat to be able to share this morning. My name is Lisa Maione, she, they pronouns, and I am an assistant professor at the Kansas City Art Institute in the US. And I want to share a little bit about a class that I taught last semester. And calling it micro and macro, micro to macro, talk a little bit about that. But this course is something I wrote and taught. It was an elective class, and this idea of teaching something like this cabinet of lettering, type design, and typographic curiosities has been a little bit of a dream. So in a sense, it was a really wonderful chance to be able to bring together some things that I've been thinking about when it comes to type. So, micro, macro. How to have students sort of begin to see better the tiny details, see the nuances, to be able to make, notice them and make them, to sharpen our eyes, and to understand the proliferation of these little tiny, tiny decisions we make and how it informs an impact in context. These words, read, seen, felt, and heard, were something that we talked about quite a bit during the class through our readings and discussions. Thinking about where language lives, how it is embodied, where it comes from, how we find it, and how we might maybe sort of collect it and maybe recollect it or recollect it for and with one another. So a quick overview. We talk a little bit about the class, the structure within the course itself, the influences and catalysts, the guests that we had come through, and a chunk of student work that came out of the course, and a few last reflections. So some practicals. This was just last fall, so still relatively fresh. It was an open elective, which means it's open to everyone at the school. So I teach in the graphic design department. However, we have fiber, painting, ceramics, product design, illustration, animation, to name a few of the 13 majors we have. And in that sense, it was a mixed class, both in terms of major as well as in focus and concentration, as well as levels. There was a sophomore and also fourth-year students. And this is within a BFA school and program, so not a master's program. Broadly speaking, it was a chance to be able to bring some basics of typography and type principles, knowing that there would be a mix of both students who have taken some of the core courses within graphic design and others who have absolutely not. Thinking about and talking about the differences and being able to differentiate between calligraphy, lettering, and type design was sort of a big thesis at the very beginning, because that's something that students have questions around. And a huge emphasis on practice with the tools and techniques, so kind of getting a large sense of these things, workshops and critiques, and a lot of interaction. We incorporated field trips to archives and local studios as well. So in a way, maybe another way of saying it is that there was a series of exposures, practices, catalysts, and opportunities of application and synthesis. So in a sense, not a comprehensive sort of type design course. It was not all about lettering, all about calligraphy, or all about type design, but it was taking kind of a sense of all of those things and to see how it might fit into each of these students' practices. and to really be generous with what it is that each of these spaces and the sort of the spectra between offers creative practice. Influences, catalysts. So the first 4 weeks or so of the semester, we kind of just went all out. We began talking about those differences between type design, calligraphy, and type design. And with that, kind of straight out, just started visiting and looking at what's around in Kansas City. Linda Hall Library has a special collections. It's a science and technology library. So a lot of their collections, through it having the lens of science and technology, printing is a large part of that collection. So examples of manuscripts, printed manuscripts, or manuscripts, printed pieces. Looking and talking about the sort of way that printing and distribution worked, and evidence of that. Here in the Linda Hall, we were able to kind of really get up close and personal, right, with all of these pieces. They don't want any gloves on. They invite us in and give us a sort of a grand tour of maybe 16 or so specimens, and kind of let the students look and observe, take images, and really spend time with the work. Similarly, and across town, the University of Kansas has a pretty large medical school, and within that medical school is a regular library, as well as a special collections, Clenending Medical Library Special Collections. And in that space, too, seeing a range of ways that we've described not only the way our bodies work and the way the plants work, and to see kind of all of these mechanisms that we use to describe and learn from one another. In the West Bottoms, in another part of town, there's the Kansas City Center for Ink and Paper Arts, which always felt like a sort of mysterious space. And there we met Calvert Guthrie, who long had been a calligrapher and lettering artist at Hallmark. He's been sort of running this community and collective space for quite a time, and there the students were able to see kind of how a community of lettering and typography has been in place in Kansas City for a number of decades, and to be exposed to some of those things. At our library, both at the school as well as a modest library in the corner of one of our classrooms, we sort of used every opportunity to kind of look at and see those things through the lens of type. Looking for examples and things to be influenced by, things that we can look at, as well as begin to create tools with which we could make things with. With black paper, spending in a workshop we ran, looking at both how we might amount to letters and forms, as well as how sort of like subtle movements, shifts and proportions can change the way, the atmosphere, the voice of each of these things, and how they might imply a larger system of letter forms. Many of the students had never touched a calligraphy brush in their lives. So we're looking at kind of like, what is calligraphy? How can we, how is it made? We see all of these beautiful things on Instagram and on Etsy and all of these places, but what is actually in those things? What makes them? So getting kind of an overview of sense of what's out there, and having free range to use these things. Using them together at first, and then being able to sort of borrow and essentially have a materials and tool library that the students can activate whenever and however they need it over the course of the semester. And not all the stuff is pretty, right? In a way, the unsteadiness of the hand, being so accustomed to the iPad, sort of like smoothing one's line, and kind of almost being surprised by the unsteadiness of one's hand, and kind of being confronted with what ink really does on paper, what happens when you really have paper running up against kind of the wrong way of writing or using a tool, and relishing in that. And relishing in both sort of like focusing in, as well as, and using the arm as well as the body. Changing the scale of the way that we write, not only, maybe sort of almost being confronted by the small scale of one's own hand, but then also what happens when we move around these letters, and use the things that we see and respond to them, how might and where letters emerge for us, how new forms or new kinds of proportions or strangenesses might occur that could maybe inform later projects. And observing in one another how, when working together, when looking and seeing and imaging together, where and how language shows up. In a sign painting workshop with Andrea Bosnak, a local sign painter, she was able to bring the vocabulary of how enamel paint and a brush and one's hand and arm and body relate to the surface of glass, which, to everyone's surprise, felt really different from painting on anything else. But it really gave an opportunity to sort of slow down, slow the hand, slow the eye, not every stroke is full of paint at every moment. You're really really have a relationship with the tools that are in front of you. And it was a way to, again, sort of see how and where these things that we might see on a coffee shop window or pastry shop, where it comes from. And to see that these things are social, energizing, and a part of the larger sort of maybe community that we're building. On campus, we have some tools in our wood shop. So wood carving with this, the shaper tool, perhaps some of you have used this, but essentially sort of a small router to be able to easily take vector Bezier images or Bezier files, be able to cut with them and really kind of feel like you can, again, create another relationship with the line, right? To see a thing on Illustrator, to see have a stroke or a line, to be able to bring it into a space like this and see what happens when it's embodied. And from there, what could we do? During the semester, Piotr Sehalski from Labor Camp came and spoke at UMKC, the University of Missouri, Kansas City. My school and theirs collaborated together to bring him in. And there, too, another opportunity to see how language, how responding to the day-to-day updates in his particular project, how both sort of influence of voice and influence of society could inflect in a typographic choice. Nat Piper zoomed in for a lecture to share a little bit about their way of seeing how their relationship with the alphabet, with type. It was, we have in the printmaking department, there's an elective on queer publishing, and many of the students had taken that, so it was wonderful to be able to kind of, again, sort of bring and create more connections between the work that they might be doing in another course in a different department, and seeing how it, again, sort of comes up for someone else, and to also see different folks, at the stage. And one of the things that really resonated with our class was this notion of, Nat shared, I use language as a sieve and I push the body through it. And we really loved sort of how the conversation around that, almost how sort of like slippery or goopy or massive it felt, and felt so different from what might be sort of a modest, sort of delicate piece on a page or on a screen. And that work sort of got us thinking too, of like how and where might the forms and maybe tools that we're making sort of change our own sense of what we can share with others. And of course, guest critiques and conversation around work as ever, right, as the influences and inflections. Paulino Otero, a local jewelry artist who works with arguably typographic forms, Josh Farmer, a writer for Type Together, and Jem Eskenazi, also here, type designer and designer, informing some of the students' results. So all to say that much of that, or a good part of that, sort of happened within the first half of that semester, in the sense that really kind of like making it a sort of exposure festival, and having fun with that, having sort of like finding things in that, knowing that it wasn't going to be a complete exploration of any of these things, but that then after those 4 or so weeks, Gesundheit, students could sort of revisit this sense, this question or this proposal, and wonder if they wanted to, sort of have, or for each of them to propose a 10-week scheme to help them focus on some aspect, right? So perhaps calligraphy caught on, great, you want to keep going, fantastic. You're interested in lettering, excellent, let's go. For those who wanted to dive into glyphs and type design, we're game for that too. So in a way, kind of these 3 streams with some overlap was the invitation to the students. So what happened? So what was made? Here are some examples. Rebecca Wagner was really taken by that sign painting workshop, and she made some strange things that day. And I was like, okay, in the sense that I think there was a sort of a way of maybe translating things that she had been seeing or has often drawn with pencil, and bringing that into painted world. And she appreciated how hard it was, right? And that was something that many of the students noticed. So sort of spending time with enamel paint. I don't even know how many little cups she went through over the semester. But through practice, through focus and her interest in translating these lyrics, created this installation in one of our small gallery rooms downstairs. And again, is this completely perfect? Could we take a microscope here and kind of see there's some legibility issues, all of this. But the number of sketches, the number of sort of trials and curiosities that were there, and really building this thing that really felt ambitious and sort of equally sort of curious as the person themselves. It's interesting to see her. Maybe a few months later, I also had her in a more recent class, the self-directed inquiry course, which is like the diploma project. And their interest in signage continued. So maybe not enamel paint in this part of the project, but taking these ghost signs around Kansas City, of which there are so many, because it is a city that has transitioned from many different eras and industries, and to see her continue this sort of maybe fascination and particularity on interpreting and kind of refinding what has been faded signs that we can no longer or barely read. Allegra had maybe a million, what felt like sort of this very fat stack of these stickers. These stickers are from the post office and they're free. So in a way, it's sort of this free surface that can be taped up, tagged up anywhere. And Allegra was, I don't really know what I'm going to do with these, but I want to use them somehow. Fantastic. Sounds good. And they landed on bringing a piece of music that they had been listening to, and sort of laying out a very intensive spreadsheet of all of the lyric names or all of the lyric words, and mapped out 256 of these words that they would need in order to have all of the lyrics to this song, not really knowing exactly what that would do. They were also interested in this type of writing, right? This type of sort of space between maybe a calligraphic voice and a lettering one, and getting better at it. So between September and December, one of the things that might sort of feel like, of course, a natural progression was improvement. Right, to sort of see someone sort of find a confidence in their hand, in a way, sort of what has been in their mind, to sort of see and be able to do that on paper, on sticker. And part of their work was to put that together along with the music itself.
At the edge of a universe, humming a tune. For merely dreaming we were snow.
A simple gesture, but somehow really sort of brought that together in the sense that it made it so that we could see these 256 pieces. They've since gone on and tagged all of these stickers in different places in the city, and has been working on a large photography project, and to see how that might manifest into the next phase. Carson likes to go outside. A student who is always fascinated with form, and what he brought to the table was maybe a type of way of interpreting and using the walk at a place around his home, and looking for a way to be able to bring these letters or these forms into letter. There's something kind of, in a way, sort of felt connected to some of his earlier work, which can sometimes feel, again, sort of like, is how abstracted is this? Like, are we reading anything? Like, is this metal? Unclear. But this sort of body of work that seemed to be beginning to emerge for the student was really beginning to bring together the humor, the strangeness, and perhaps the surreality of nature that they've always been noticing and want to embody somehow. Olivia is an ever maker, sort of in a way, whether it's paper or manipulating clay forms, noodles, etc. They're all game for it. One of the things that they noticed in the calligraphy workshop was both sort of the difficulty and also kind of maybe an emerging voice that seemed to be maybe already in their handwriting in some way, but kind of didn't really come out unless they painted. But you could see kind of the space between how they acted when they were working with paint and how they and the distance between that and the way that they would write their notes, and sort of finding this maybe other voice between. So using quite a bit of the semester kind of developing this, and one of the questions they had along the way was, where could this content be coming from? Do they always need to have something to say? And one of the places that they ended up using was the Quora forums, and sort of finding the strangest questions and doing these daily compositions in response to the queries. Harrison, ever interested in the sort of modular form or how form kind of maybe inflects or changes how he might be writing, how others might write, so creating these sort of activities for others to be able to utilize and change. So both seeing how he might be doing something, how others might be doing things, so creating sort of maybe opportunities for others to invent or create new typographic forms. So tools has been something that a student has brought into multiple projects in other classes and was part of their work in here. Asteria had stained glass in mind and was wondering, okay, like stained glass, typography, how can it come together? And for a while, it was pretty ugly, pretty messy, lots of circles, lots of geometry, lots of sort of like, I can see where that's going, and I don't know if that's really what you mean. But eventually, a place that felt both absolutely aligned to their interest and curiosity with sort of interactive tools and transparency and light as an opportunity for others to maybe see where or how much we need in order to say or share typographic information. AMS, this video might not be working, but sort of thinking about how we might sort of like fill space or take up space, and using AR as a way to be able to geolocate and sort of like create these installations around our department to be discovered. Casey Collins, at calligraphy workshop, again, almost sort of like seeing kind of this whole other way that their hand could move, and really wanted to spend time with it. It ended up doing like journal entries and just only writing in black letter for a while. Again, is every stroke absolutely perfect from day one? Absolutely not. But their interest in kind of like spending time with the words and spending more time with thinking and almost like finding like these other new patterns that were happening or maybe other things that they were noticing about what they wrote about when they wrote this way, and highlighting some of those things through these physical forms. AJ Robles is a graphic design major and has been incorporating fiber and knitted art into their work. And in that sense, it was an opportunity to kind of extend some of their maybe specificity of how they might be using their tools. So creating a hand loom on their own, finding, again, different opportunities within the materials that they had in front of them. It connected with some of the work that they did for a study abroad in Mexico. So again, kind of like seeing where else and how else weaving might occur for their practice. Jaden Green is a painting sophomore and came into the class telling me just from day one, I'm only in this class because this is the only thing that fit in my schedule. And I was like, great, this is the worst thing that you can tell someone, like maybe like at the same time, like I find that hilarious, so let's work from here. And it was a delight in the sense that this person who, again, sophomore in painting, just starting their painting major, also in this typography class, also has like no interest in typography. I was like, all right, well, we're going to be interested in typography starting now. Or I'd love to see what typography means with your practice in mind. And being able to sort of find a way between their interest in native plants, they have a lot of sort of organic forms in their painting, and to again kind of just like sort of like letting these things, that these inflections, these catalysts, maybe find their way into how they could maybe sort of change and again sort of like make surreal and strange. I think we were all really delighted to see kind of where, again, this voice was going and how it has, how it sort of changed from its a very unsure hand at the beginning to the end. I caught up with her a couple of days ago, or a couple of weeks ago, and to see what she had, she was producing for the end of the year, and it's been interesting to just kind of see like how typography has carried on. I'm not her studio professor at this point, but again, even they were saying like, hey, that typography class that they took with you, somehow that's really kind of staying with them. So interested to see where these conversations might continue going. Diane Sung is a ceramicist, as well as a fiber artist, and seeing how their work has been kind of infused in language, sort of taking the whole semester and choosing to sort of like let letter form, let language, let sort of the spaces between Korean and English kind of infuse where and what they were producing. And that sort of space between languages is something that Diane has been curious about and been interested in, and hence their engagement with the course. It was exciting to see, doing studio visits with them, seeing how this kind of ambiguity of space, sort of like creating these almost like mass barrier forms made out of type-like forms, might be, sort of maybe overlapping with their handwriting. And in their case, they created this little swirl, after many of these sort of like these maybe physical casts that they were creating, to try to see like how many things could they make, right, with this one curve. And it turns out through photography, there's a lot of forms that one can see, like through the same thing. So wondering, like could one have just this one squiggle, or perhaps maybe with two squiggles, how much one could say. And it's a strange thing, right? It's a strange thing to kind of see, but in a way, sort of having this sort of like way of thinking spatially, this way of thinking between languages, this way of being infused between, they were able to bring that towards their practice and their work. There was also type design. So Adam Locke was probably one of the few people who was kind of like, yes, I'm going to make type. I'm going for the first time into glyphs. Fantastic, excellent. Let's do this. Because they had made a typeface in their foundation year a couple of years back, not in a class that I had taught. They were fascinated with Decimal by Heffler. And Heffler and Co. And we're really disappointed with how like not personality-esque that typeface felt. So they wanted to go in and say, okay, I want to be influenced by the typography on watches, I will do that. So they did that. 3 years later, kind of revisiting those sketches, completely throwing them out and saying, okay, now that I've sort of seen and maybe can see a little bit more clearly, how might I sketch from here? And it was exciting to sort of bring someone into the fold, right? Bring someone in for the first time into glyphs, and sort of bring the things that I had been exposed to at Type at Cooper and in my own work, and use that as a space for conversation around like where maybe particularities and specifics could happen in their form making. And where the nuances can be, like how to sort of like move in those tighter spaces. And to get to somewhere clearer, more akin to the sense and the voice that they've been looking for, and to see that embodiment as happen over the course of a 10, 12-week sort of period. This semester they've gone on and have continued this track, doing more work on analog and being influenced by some other sort of signage and objects that they've been looking at and looking to create. And I thought this would be appropriate to end on as we are here, but to but to say that, for them, like looking for ways to, looking for their own relationships with type. Is it looking for things that they like and then, incorporating that? Is it, is it a sort of research-heavy process, et cetera? And for them, sort of like writing about and looking for objects and bringing them to light were things that they were focusing their work on. To wrap here, some reflections on this work. This work happened. What's happening? What am I thinking now? It's clear to me that learning how type works or learning how type is made is useful to understand and appreciate regardless of where you're going. This is not about becoming a type designer, or this class is not about becoming a type designer, but it is about becoming a type, if not appreciator, a sort of like a typographically sort of maybe allowing typography to be a legible aspect of the world. Creating a space to wonder and try things out with, on, and for others. And without too much heavy of an agenda is critical for the balance of time and energy while engaged in an intense creative study. And utilizing this sort of space for sort of like almost like language-oriented joy. Calligraphy slows the hand and the eye down, and the students, and in a way it surprised me how the students felt that difference and really wanted to kind of like stay there and stay in calligraphy, spend more time, and get some of those tools for themselves. And somehow that, as it relates to reflective practices with writing as it relates to design, somehow that space of writing and making visible one's thoughts feels important to pay closer attention to. None of these things would be here without all of the folks who sort of came in and out of our classroom, as well as the students who came along for this adventure, this typographic adventure. And while everyone got exposed to glyphs, to calligraphy, to lettering, they all sort of came away with the things that they needed for their creative practices. And with that, I hope that that many of you who are teaching type can both know that type belongs in a type design program as well as in non-type design programs, and that it's exciting and that it's fun, and that collaborating across disciplines or across schools is really the key to continuing that joy. Thank you.